Stop for a second and think about this. If all entertainment disappeared right now, no phone, no music, no videos, no games, no scrolling, how long would it take before the day started to feel unbearable? For most of human history, that question wouldn't even make sense. People woke up, lived entire days, and went to sleep without ever needing to be entertained. Not because they were disciplined or enlightened, but because entertainment, as a concept, did not exist. And yet, they were not constantly bored. This video is not about nostalgia. It's not about saying life was better or worse. It's about understanding something deeply uncomfortable. What actually filled the hours when there was nothing to distract the mind. No dopamine loops. No background noise. No escape. Once you understand what people did all day before entertainment existed, modern life starts to feel very different. You may realize that boredom is not a lack of stimulation. It's a mismatch between time and meaning. And that realization changes how you see everything. Before we continue, I'm curious, what time is it for you right now? And where are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments. People watching later will see how different lives intersect at this exact moment. If you enjoy slow, thoughtful history that actually makes you rethink everyday life, like the video and subscribe. These videos only work if you stay until the end, because the most important part comes later, not at the beginning. Now, let's go back to a world where no one asked how to kill time, because time killed you if you wasted it. Before entertainment existed, the day did not feel open. It felt occupied from the moment it began. Not busy in the modern sense of meetings and notifications, but filled with tasks that could not be postponed without consequence. Time was not something to use wisely. It was something that pressed forward regardless of preference. The day demanded attention, and attention was expensive. People did not wake up asking how they wanted to spend their time. They woke up responding to conditions. Light entered the space. Temperature shifted. Animals stirred. Other people began moving. These signals were not optional. They structured the day before any conscious decision was made. Choice came later, and in limited form. The first hours of the day were consumed by preparation. Not preparation for work, but preparation for survival itself. Fire had to be managed or rebuilt. Water had to be fetched. Food had to be assessed, not eaten casually, but evaluated. What could be used today, what needed to be preserved, what would not last. These decisions were not abstract. They shaped whether the day would be manageable or tense. Nothing was automated. Nothing happened in the background. Every essential process required visible effort. This alone consumed what we would now call free time. The idea of finishing basic tasks early and having hours left over did not exist for most people. Tasks were slow because tools were simple and energy was finite. Grinding grain, cutting wood, repairing clothing, preparing meals, cleaning spaces. Each of these took far longer than modern equivalents. And once one task ended, another immediately replaced it. There was no gap where boredom could settle. Work was not something that began at a certain hour and ended cleanly. It blended into life itself. The distinction between doing something and doing nothing was unclear because stillness rarely meant rest. Stillness often meant waiting. Waiting for heat to rise. Waiting for something to finish. Waiting for someone else. Waiting was not empty time. It required attention. Missing the right moment could waste hours of effort. Because of this, the mind stayed engaged by necessity. Distraction was dangerous. A distracted person made mistakes. Mistakes meant wasted labor. Wasted labor meant strain later. Entertainment, which pulls attention away from the immediate environment, would have been maladaptive. Attention was a survival skill. Physical labor shaped mental rhythm. Repetitive movements anchored thought. When the body is occupied for long periods, the mind does not drift freely. It follows the task. Planning is short-term. Thought is practical. The future is considered in terms of seasons, not dreams. This had a powerful psychological effect. People did not constantly evaluate their emotional state. There was no habit of asking, "Am I enjoying this?" Enjoyment was not the metric. Effectiveness was. Did the work get done? Did the household function? Did the day move forward without loss? These questions replaced modern emotional self-monitoring. Social interaction happened inside this structure. People talked while working, not instead of it. Conversation filled gaps between tasks, but rarely displaced them. Silence was common and unremarkable. It did not signal discomfort. It signaled focus. Without entertainment, silence was not something to escape. It was something to inhabit. Even when people gathered, it was usually around shared effort. Cooperation was practical before it was emotional. Helping meant accomplishing something together, not spending time together for its own sake. Time together was justified by necessity. This reduced the feeling of isolation without creating the expectation of constant stimulation. People were rarely alone, but they were also rarely indulged. One of the most important differences between then and now is how time was perceived. Time did not feel empty because it was always full of obligation. The modern sense of boredom often comes from surplus time without structure. In the past, structure existed everywhere, imposed by the environment. When people rested, it was because energy was depleted, not because tasks were finished. Rest was reactive, not planned. A body stopped because it had to, not because the schedule allowed it. This made rest shallow and temporary. Once energy returned slightly, activity resumed. This cycle trained endurance rather than comfort. Because rest was limited, pleasure was episodic. Moments of enjoyment existed, but they were not constant or expected. They arrived unexpectedly, during conversation, during shared success, during brief relief. Because they were rare, they were not demanded. Demand is a modern habit. The absence of entertainment also meant the absence of constant comparison. People did not evaluate their day against idealized versions of life. They evaluated it against yesterday. If today functioned similarly, it was acceptable. Improvement was slow and incremental. Sudden change was suspicious. This reduced dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction requires imagined alternatives. Without visible alternatives, acceptance grows. Children learned this rhythm early. They observed adults working continuously. Play existed, but it was integrated into the environment rather than separated into special time. Children imitated tasks. They learned patience through waiting. They learned focus through repetition. These lessons shaped adult expectations. By adulthood, constant engagement felt normal. Idle time felt strange, not desirable. The modern fear of being bored would have seemed incomprehensible. This does not mean life was easy or fulfilling in a romantic sense. It means life was dense. Every day carried weight. Weight anchors attention. Attention prevents boredom. Boredom requires detachment from necessity. Without entertainment, the mind did not ask to be occupied. It already was. As the day progressed, tasks shifted but did not lighten. Afternoon did not bring relief. It brought continuation. Maintenance replaced preparation. Repair replaced construction. Planning for tomorrow replaced reaction to today. Evening did not mark freedom. It marked limitation. Light faded. Energy dropped. Activity narrowed. Conversation slowed. People did not seek stimulation. They conserved effort. Sleep arrived not as escape, but as collapse. This rhythm repeated daily. Over time, it became invisible. People did not think about how they spent time. They simply lived inside the pattern. This is the crucial point. Before entertainment existed, time did not need to be filled. It needed to be survived. Modern entertainment fills a void that did not exist then. It compensates for a gap created by efficiency, surplus, and separation from necessity. Before those conditions, distraction was unnecessary. Understanding this changes the question entirely. The question is not, how did people avoid boredom? The question is, how did boredom become possible at all? And the answer begins here, when survival no longer consumed the day. As the day moved forward, the pressure of necessity did not loosen. It shifted. Morning effort turned into afternoon maintenance, and maintenance quietly consumed more time than preparation ever did. Tools dulled, clothing tore, containers cracked, surfaces accumulated residue. Nothing stayed finished for long. Completion was temporary. Everything required attention again, often sooner than expected. This constant return of tasks eliminated the modern sense of closure. Today, many people experience work as something that can be done for the day. Before entertainment existed, work rarely offered that relief. Tasks did not conclude neatly. They paused, and pauses were fragile. Because of this, people developed a very different relationship with effort. Effort was not something to minimize or optimize. It was something to pace. Exhausting oneself early carried consequences later. Energy management mattered more than speed. This pacing shaped attention and emotion. There was little room for impulsive behavior. Impulses waste energy. Energy was life. The mind adjusted accordingly. Thought followed a narrow path. What must be done next? What cannot be neglected? What can be delayed without danger? This internal prioritization ran constantly in the background. It did not feel stressful because it was normal. Stress arises when demands exceed expectation. Here, demand defined expectation. Without entertainment, there was no competing pull on attention. Nothing promised relief from the task at hand. No alternative reality waited in the background. This absence mattered. When there is no escape, adaptation replaces avoidance. People did not ask how to distract themselves from effort. They asked how to endure it. Endurance became the central skill. This endurance was not dramatic. It was quiet and habitual. People learned to continue without questioning whether continuation was desirable. Desire itself narrowed. Wanting less reduced disappointment. Reduced disappointment conserved energy. Modern boredom often comes from wanting stimulation that does not arrive. In the past, wanting itself was restrained by necessity. Social structure reinforced this. Individuals rarely worked alone for long. Even solitary tasks existed within shared environments. Others were always nearby, engaged in similar labor. This created a collective rhythm. When everyone is occupied, individual dissatisfaction feels insignificant. Shared effort normalizes straying. Communication reflected this environment. Conversation was brief, practical, and situational. There was little storytelling for entertainment alone. Stories emerged organically, often tied to memory, instruction, or caution. They were not consumed passively. They were tools for remembering and teaching. Without entertainment, language served function before pleasure. This functional communication reduced emotional escalation. There was no expectation that conversation should entertain or uplift. It existed to coordinate, warn, or inform. Emotional expression was real, but it was not constantly performed. Performance is a modern habit. Even moments that might resemble leisure today, sitting, waiting, watching, were experienced differently. Waiting did not feel empty. It felt anticipatory. Something was expected to happen, and attention remained fixed on that expectation. The mind did not drift freely because drifting risked missing the moment. Missing moments had consequences. This attentiveness shaped perception of time. Time felt slow in effort, but fast in memory. Days were long, but weeks passed without clear distinction. Without entertainment to mark time artificially, memory grouped days by seasons and outcomes rather than experiences. Experience density was high, but novelty was low. This combination produced stability. When days resemble one another closely, emotional spikes flatten. Life feels heavy but steady. Steadiness reduces anxiety about the future. Anxiety thrives on uncertainty. Here, uncertainty existed, but it was familiar. Familiar uncertainty is easier to tolerate than unfamiliar freedom. Children absorbed this model early. They learned that attention belonged to the task in front of them. Play existed, but it was improvised and brief. It did not demand separate time or resources. Play emerged between obligations rather than replacing them. This meant play did not redefine expectations. It remained secondary. As children grew, they did not develop the expectation that time should be enjoyable. They developed the expectation that time should be used. Usefulness became the measure of a good day. This expectation shaped adulthood profoundly. Adults did not experience boredom because boredom requires unused capacity combined with unmet desire. Capacity was always in use. Desire was calibrated downward. Even frustration behaved differently. When frustration arose, it did not seek escape. It dissipated through continuation. There was nowhere else for it to go. Without distraction, emotion passed through rather than being paused or amplified. Modern entertainment often delays emotional processing by interrupting it. In the past, interruption was rare. This made emotional life heavier but more linear. Peaks and valleys existed, but they were not constantly reactivated. Once something passed, it stayed past. The absence of entertainment also meant the absence of constant self-reference. People did not continually ask how they felt about what they were doing. Feeling was secondary to doing. This reduced self-consciousness. Self-consciousness grows in idle minds. As evening approached, activity narrowed rather than expanded. The fading of light imposed limits. Tasks were simplified. Conversation slowed. There was no expectation of stimulation to fill the night. Darkness did not need to be defeated. It was accepted. Acceptance is a powerful regulator. People did not seek to extend the day artificially. When the environment limited activity, people adapted their expectations rather than resisting. Resistance consumes energy. Acceptance conserves it. Sleep arrived naturally, not as reward but as necessity. Exhaustion did not feel like failure. It felt earned. Sleep was not entertainment. It was recovery. Recovery prepared the next cycle. This daily loop reinforced itself. Over time, it shaped identity. People saw themselves not as individuals seeking fulfillment, but as participants in continuity. Life was something that happened through them, not something they curated. Curation is a modern instinct. This explains why boredom was not a problem that needed solving. Boredom requires a gap between expectation and experience. Here, expectation matched reality. Reality was demanding. Expectation was modest. As centuries passed, this way of life created cultures deeply adapted to monotony and effort. Monotony did not feel empty. It felt reliable. Reliability reduced fear. Fear drives distraction. Without fear, distraction is unnecessary. Understanding this makes modern life appear strange. Today, effort has been compressed. Tasks end cleanly. Survival consumes a fraction of the day. Time opens up, but without inherited structure. Into that openness, entertainment flows. Entertainment fills what survival once occupied. Before entertainment existed, there was no empty time to fill. There was only time to endure, manage, and survive. And because of that, people did not need distraction. When entertainment did not exist, the human mind did not experience emptiness the way it does today. This is one of the hardest ideas for modern audiences to grasp, because we now associate mental quiet with lack, boredom, or discomfort. In the past, mental quiet was not interpreted as a problem. It was simply the default state between demands. The mind was not expected to be constantly stimulated. It was expected to remain available. Availability mattered more than excitement. A mind that wandered too far from the body was inefficient. Efficiency was not about productivity in the modern sense. It was about readiness. Readiness to respond to change, to interruption, to need. Distraction reduced readiness. Without entertainment, distraction was rare. Thought followed the body closely. When the body worked, the mind stayed with it. This produced a form of attention that modern people often experience only briefly, during intense manual work, long walks, or repetitive tasks. Attention narrowed naturally. Thoughts became cyclical rather than branching. The mind returned to the same concerns again and again, not because it lacked imagination, but because imagination had little practical use. Practical thinking dominated. People planned constantly, but the scope of planning was limited. Planning focused on immediate continuity. How to get through the day, how to prepare for the next one, how to avoid waste, how to manage fatigue. Long-term dreams existed, but they were faint and flexible. A rigid dream is dangerous in uncertain conditions. Flexibility ensured survival. Without entertainment, imagination was not fed continuously. It appeared intermittently, often during low-effort moments like walking, waiting, or repetitive motion. These moments did not produce fantasy worlds. They produced reflection grounded in reality. Reflection stayed close to lived experience. This created a different emotional relationship with thought itself. Thoughts were not something to be managed or escaped. They were something to be endured like weather. Some thoughts passed quickly, others lingered. Without distraction, the mind learned patience with itself. Patience reduced anxiety. Modern anxiety often comes from the attempt to escape thought rather than experience it. In the past, escape was rarely available. Thought ran its course. Once it passed, it rarely returned with the same intensity. There were no external triggers constantly reactivating it. Memory worked differently because of this. Without constant new input, memory replayed familiar events. This repetition did not feel obsessive. It felt stabilizing. The mind revisited known patterns rather than being pulled toward novelty. Novelty was rare and therefore significant. When something new happened, it stood out sharply. A visitor, a change in weather, an unexpected event. These moments carried weight because they were not diluted by constant stimulation. Attention gathered around them naturally. Entertainment today flattens novelty by making everything available at all times. Without entertainment, novelty retained power. The absence of distraction also changed how people experienced emotion. Emotions were not interrupted or postponed. They moved through the body alongside effort. Sadness, frustration, contentment, fatigue, none were avoided intentionally. Avoidance requires alternatives. Alternatives were scarce. As a result, emotions were less volatile. They rose and fell without amplification. There was no algorithm feeding them back, no content reinforcing them repeatedly. An emotion appeared, lingered, and passed. Passing was normal. This did not mean people were emotionally healthy in a modern sense. It meant emotional life was simpler, less managed, less fragmented. Social thought followed the same pattern. Without entertainment, people thought more about those physically present. Relationships were not mediated through constant communication. Absence meant absence. Presence mattered more because it was limited. This intensified local bonds and reduced abstract comparison. People did not constantly compare their lives to distant others. They compared themselves to neighbors, family, and immediate peers. This limited dissatisfaction. Without exposure to idealized alternatives, expectations remained grounded. Grounded expectations reduce frustration. Silence played a major role in this mental landscape. Silence was common and unremarkable. It did not signal failure or emptiness. It signaled normality. People did not rush to fill silence. They allowed it to exist. Allowing silence trains attention. In silence, the mind does not panic. It settles. This settling does not feel pleasurable or painful. It feels neutral. Neutrality is rare today because stimulation trains the mind to expect input. Expectation creates discomfort when unmet. Before entertainment, expectation was low. Low expectation made silence tolerable. Waiting is a perfect example. Waiting did not feel like wasted time. It felt like a state. Waiting required attention, but not action. The mind stayed alert without stimulation. This capacity is now rare. Entertainment erodes the ability to wait. People also developed a different relationship with curiosity. Curiosity was practical rather than exploratory. It focused on how things worked, how to fix them, how to improve efficiency. Abstract curiosity existed, but it was not constantly rewarded. Reward shapes habit. Modern entertainment rewards curiosity instantly. Click, scroll, watch. In the past, curiosity often went unanswered. Questions lingered. Unanswered questions did not cause distress. They simply remained unanswered. Tolerance for uncertainty was higher. This tolerance reduced mental urgency. Without urgency, thought slowed. Slow thought is less emotionally charged. It does not demand immediate resolution. This is one reason why boredom did not exist as a psychological state. Boredom requires both unused attention and unmet desire. Attention was always engaged. Desire was restrained. The mind did not ask for more. It adapted to what was present. Even during moments of low activity, the mind remained tethered to physical reality. Observing surroundings, listening, monitoring change, these activities occupied attention without entertainment. Observation replaced consumption. Observation does not provide excitement, but it provides grounding. Grounding reduces restlessness. Children learned this early. They watched adults work. They mimicked tasks. Their minds were trained through participation rather than stimulation. Play existed, but it was not continuous or curated. It arose spontaneously and ended quickly. Because play was not constant, it did not become expected. Expectation again matters. By adulthood, people did not interpret a quiet mind as lacking. They interpreted it as ready. Ready for the next task, the next need, the next change. Readiness replaced stimulation as the mental ideal. This is difficult to imagine today, where readiness feels like anxiety and stimulation feels like relief. The inversion happened slowly, as entertainment entered daily life and replaced effort as the primary occupier of time. Before that inversion, the mind functioned under a different logic. It was shaped by scarcity, repetition, and necessity. It did not need to be entertained because it was already occupied. Occupied not by pleasure, but by purpose. Purpose does not need to be exciting to be effective. It needs to be continuous. Without entertainment, continuity was the mind's default state. As we move forward, the next part will explore what happened when moments of collective pause did appear. Gatherings, shared events, and rare breaks. And why those moments felt powerful precisely because they were not constant. When moments of pause did appear in a world without entertainment, they carried a weight that is difficult to imagine today. These pauses were not frequent, not planned, and not protected. They emerged between demands rather than replacing them. Because of this, they were experienced intensely, even when they were quiet. A pause did not mean freedom. It meant temporary suspension. This distinction mattered. In modern life, a pause often comes with the expectation of enjoyment. People pause in order to consume something: music, video, conversation, stimulation. Before entertainment, pauses did not promise pleasure. They promised breath. Breath was enough. When physical effort slowed, the mind did not immediately search for input. It remained alert, scanning the environment, listening, observing. Attention did not collapse inward into craving. It stayed outward, responsive. This outward orientation prevented restlessness. Restlessness is born when attention turns inward without structure. Structure still existed, even in pause. This is why waiting did not feel like boredom. Waiting was a skill. It required patience, awareness, and restraint. People learned to wait without needing something to happen immediately. They waited for heat to build, for water to settle, for others to finish tasks. Waiting was productive because it preserved timing. Acting too early wasted effort. Acting too late carried cost. The mind learned to exist comfortably in anticipation. Anticipation without stimulation is rare today. We now fill anticipation with distraction. In the past, anticipation was allowed to exist on its own. It sharpened awareness rather than dulling it. This had long-term effects on perception. People became sensitive to subtle changes: light, sound, temperature, rhythm. These cues guided action. Entertainment, which overwhelms the senses, was unnecessary because the environment itself provided information. Information replaced stimulation. When groups gathered, the absence of entertainment made presence itself meaningful. Gathering was not about being amused. It was about sharing time, labor, or transition. Even silence in a group did not feel awkward. It felt functional. Awkwardness arises when silence contradicts expectation. Here, it matched expectation. Shared pauses reinforced social bonds without requiring performance. People did not need to be interesting. They needed to be reliable. Reliability builds trust. Trust stabilizes groups. Stabilized groups require less distraction. Storytelling, when it occurred, did not function as escapism. It functioned as memory. Stories were not told to pass time. They were told to remember, warn, or explain. Repetition mattered more than novelty. A story's value came from how well it was known, not how surprising it was. Surprise was risky. Familiarity was safe. Because stories were repeated, they slowed the mind rather than accelerating it. Listening did not produce excitement. It produced recognition. Recognition is calming. Calming experiences do not demand more. Modern entertainment thrives on escalation. Past storytelling thrived on reinforcement. This difference shaped attention spans. Without constant novelty, attention did not need to reset frequently. The mind learned to stay with the same input for long periods. This did not feel impressive. It felt normal. Normality defines tolerance. Even imagination behaved differently. Without constant external input, imagination was grounded in lived reality. Fantasies were limited by experience. People imagined variations of what they knew, not entirely different worlds. This kept desire aligned with possibility. Alignment reduces frustration. Frustration grows when imagination outpaces reality. Entertainment accelerates imagination. Without it, imagination stayed close to what was achievable. This is why dissatisfaction did not accumulate quickly. People were aware of hardship, but they did not constantly imagine escape from it. Escape requires vision. Vision requires exposure to alternatives. Alternatives were scarce. When emotional strain built up, it was processed through action rather than distraction. People worked harder, adjusted routines, or leaned on others. Emotional energy moved outward into effort. Effort dissipated emotion. Modern distraction traps emotion by postponing it. Without distraction, emotion had nowhere to hide. It moved through and left. This did not make life easier, but it made it simpler. Simplicity reduced mental noise. Mental noise is often mistaken for stimulation. In reality, it is unresolved attention. Without entertainment, attention resolved itself through use. This is why mental exhaustion was common, but mental fragmentation was rare. People were tired, but they were not pulled in dozens of directions at once. Focus remained narrow. Narrow focus is sustainable. Sustainable focus allowed people to endure monotony without panic. Monotony did not signal emptiness. It signaled continuity. Continuity was reassuring. Reassurance mattered more than excitement. Even curiosity functioned differently. Questions emerged, but answers were slow or absent. This did not create urgency. Unanswered questions were tolerated. Tolerance for ambiguity reduced anxiety. Today, unanswered questions provoke discomfort because answers are usually one click away. The expectation of resolution creates pressure. Without that expectation, pressure dissolves. Expectation again is key. The mind before entertainment was trained not to expect constant reward. Reward was rare and meaningful. When it appeared, it mattered. When it did not, life continued. This trained emotional resilience. Resilience does not mean happiness. It means stability under strain. Stability was the primary psychological goal of pre-entertainment life. This also explains why boredom, as we define it today, was not a recognized problem. Boredom requires surplus attention combined with unmet desire. Attention was always engaged. Desire was restrained by reality. Reality shaped desire rather than competing with it. Children absorbed this mental framework early. They learned patience through waiting. They learned focus through imitation. They learned endurance through repetition. Their minds were not trained to demand stimulation. By adulthood, stimulation was not missed. This does not mean people lacked joy. It means joy was not the baseline. It was contrast. Contrast only works when it is rare. Entertainment removes contrast by making pleasure constant. When pleasure is constant, it loses power. When it loses power, people seek more intense stimulation. This cycle did not exist before entertainment. Without that cycle, the mind rested in neutrality. Neutrality is often feared today. It is mistaken for emptiness. In the past, neutrality was simply the space between demands. That space did not need filling. This understanding reframes modern boredom completely. Boredom is not the absence of things to do. It is the presence of expectation without structure. Before entertainment, structure was everywhere. Structure anchored attention. Attention anchored meaning. Meaning did not come from excitement. It came from continuation. The mind without distraction was not starved. It was conditioned differently. It expected less, tolerated more, and adapted continuously. Adaptation is the quiet opposite of stimulation. As entertainment slowly entered daily life, this mental framework began to erode. Attention learned to leap. Desire learned to expand. Expectation learned to rise. And with those changes, boredom was born. But before that transformation, the mind did not ask to be entertained. It asked to be used. Used for survival. Used for maintenance. Used for continuity. And that was enough. When entertainment did not exist, life did not feel like something missing a component. It felt complete, even when it was difficult. This is one of the hardest ideas for modern audiences to accept, because today we often experience entertainment as a necessity rather than an addition. Without it, time feels heavy. In the past, time already had weight. Entertainment was not needed to give it meaning. Meaning came from continuity. People did not wake up with the expectation that the day should offer enjoyment. They woke up with the expectation that the day would demand something from them. That demand structured everything. When life asks something of you constantly, distraction becomes irrelevant. You are already occupied. This occupation was not always intense, but it was persistent. Tasks did not overwhelm the day in dramatic bursts. They filled it steadily. Even moments that appear idle to a modern observer, sitting, waiting, watching, were mentally active. People monitored their surroundings, anticipated change, listened for cues. Attention remained engaged even when the body slowed. This is why emptiness did not appear. Emptiness requires disengagement combined with expectation. In the past, disengagement was rare and expectation was low. The mind did not wait to be entertained. It waited to respond. Responsiveness replaced stimulation as the dominant mental mode. This responsiveness shaped identity. People understood themselves as participants in an ongoing process rather than as individuals seeking fulfillment. Fulfillment is a future-oriented concept. Participation is present-oriented. The present absorbed attention so fully that the future remained abstract. Abstract futures do not provoke restlessness. Without entertainment, there was no constant reminder that life could be different. Comparison was limited to what was visible and known. Without comparison, dissatisfaction struggled to grow. Modern entertainment thrives on showing alternatives. Before it existed, alternatives were invisible. Because alternatives were invisible, desire adapted to reality. People wanted what was possible rather than imagining what was not. This alignment between desire and reality reduced internal conflict. Conflict consumes energy. Energy was needed elsewhere. This does not mean people lacked ambition. It means ambition was practical. Improvement meant small changes, a better tool, a smoother process, a slightly easier routine. These improvements mattered because they reduced effort tomorrow. Tomorrow mattered more than fantasy. Fantasy requires surplus. Surplus was rare. Emotional life followed the same logic. Emotions were experienced fully but briefly. Without distraction, emotion did not linger unnaturally. It passed as circumstances changed. There was no mechanism constantly reactivating it. Today, entertainment often traps emotion by reinforcing it repeatedly. Before entertainment, reinforcement was minimal. As a result, emotional peaks were lower, but emotional stability was higher. Life felt harder physically, but simpler psychologically. Simplicity reduces anxiety. Another key difference was how people understood pleasure. Pleasure was not expected regularly. When it appeared, it was recognized as temporary. This prevented disappointment. Disappointment arises when expectation is unmet. Expectation was modest. Because pleasure was rare, it was not pursued constantly. Pursuit consumes attention. Attention was needed for survival. This meant that people did not feel deprived by the absence of entertainment. Deprivation requires awareness of loss. Loss requires comparison. Comparison was limited. Life was evaluated against necessity, not against enjoyment. Community played a central role in this perception. Without individualized entertainment, people shared time by default. Shared time was not always pleasant, but it was grounding. It reminded individuals that they were part of something ongoing. Ongoing systems reduce existential anxiety. When people work, wait, and endure together, life feels less arbitrary. Suffering feels shared rather than personal. Shared suffering is easier to tolerate. Entertainment today often isolates. Isolation amplifies dissatisfaction. Before entertainment, isolation was rarer. Privacy existed, but solitude was limited. This constant proximity prevented the mind from spiraling inward excessively. External demands pulled attention outward. Outward attention stabilizes emotion. Even conflict functioned differently. Disagreements existed, but they were contained by necessity. People could not afford prolonged emotional rupture. Cooperation was required to survive. This encouraged resolution over escalation. Resolution preserved continuity. Without entertainment, people also experienced time differently. Days were long, but not fragmented. Activities flowed into one another naturally. There were fewer abrupt transitions. Abrupt transitions often trigger restlessness. Smooth transitions reduce it. This smoothness came from necessity, not design. Tasks followed natural rhythms. Light, weather, fatigue. These rhythms were predictable. Predictability reduced cognitive load. Reduced cognitive load reduced the need for distraction. Entertainment today often serves as cognitive relief. In the past, relief came from completion, however temporary. Completion did not mean the end of work. It meant the end of a cycle. Cycles are psychologically grounding. They give shape to effort. When life feels cyclical, it feels purposeful even when it is hard. Modern life often lacks clear cycles. Entertainment fills that gap artificially. Before entertainment, cycles were everywhere. Another important factor was how people interpreted stillness. Stillness was not viewed as wasted time. It was viewed as readiness. A still person was waiting, listening, conserving energy. This reframing eliminated the discomfort modern people feel when not actively engaged. Engagement did not require stimulation. This mindset was learned early. Children grew up observing adults who did not constantly seek distraction. Adults modeled patience, repetition, and focus. Children internalized these behaviors before developing alternative expectations. By adulthood, distraction felt unnecessary. This conditioning explains why boredom, as a concept, is historically recent. Boredom requires not only unused time, but the belief that time should be filled with pleasure. That belief did not exist. Beliefs shape perception. Before entertainment, time was not expected to entertain. It was expected to pass while something else was done. This perspective also shaped creativity. Creativity existed, but it was embedded in function. Songs accompanied work. Stories taught lessons. Patterns decorated tools. Creativity did not exist for consumption alone. It existed to reinforce memory and coordination. Reinforcement stabilizes systems. Without entertainment, creativity did not compete with necessity. It supported it. This prevented the separation between work and life that defines modern existence. Life was work. Work was life. Entertainment now exists largely to repair that separation. Repair is necessary only after division. Before division, repair was unnecessary. Understanding this reveals why modern people often feel restless even with endless entertainment. Entertainment does not restore the conditions that gave time meaning before. It replaces effort without replacing purpose. Purpose cannot be consumed. Before entertainment existed, purpose was unavoidable. Every action mattered. Every mistake carried weight. This weight anchored attention. Anchored attention prevented boredom. Boredom is the mind's response to weightlessness. As survival demands decreased over centuries, time became lighter. When time became lighter without structure, boredom appeared. Entertainment emerged to manage that boredom. This sequence matters. Entertainment did not create boredom. Boredom created entertainment. Before boredom, there was no need to escape time. Time was already occupied. Occupied by effort. Occupied by necessity. Occupied by continuation. Life without distraction did not feel empty because emptiness had no reference point. People did not imagine lives filled with stimulation. They imagined lives that continued. Continuation was enough. This is why people could endure days, weeks, and years without entertainment and not feel deprived. Their minds were not starved. They were calibrated to a different rhythm. A rhythm shaped by survival rather than stimulation. And as long as that rhythm held, boredom had nowhere to appear. As life unfolded without entertainment, something subtle but powerful happened to how people understood themselves. Identity was not built around preference, taste, or enjoyment. It was built around reliability. A person was known for what they could endure, what they could contribute, and how consistently they showed up. This kind of identity does not require stimulation to feel real. It requires continuity. Continuity anchored self-worth. Modern identity is often reinforced through expression, what someone watches, likes, follows, or consumes. Before entertainment, expression was limited. Consumption did not define a person. Behavior did. This made identity less fluid but more stable. Stability reduced internal questioning. Internal questioning is exhausting. Without entertainment, people did not spend much time reflecting on whether their lives were meaningful. Meaning was assumed. It came from participation in systems larger than the individual. Participation does not need validation. It just needs persistence. Persistence replaced purpose-seeking. This had a calming psychological effect. When meaning is embedded in routine, the mind does not search for it constantly. Searching creates dissatisfaction. Embedded meaning creates acceptance. Acceptance does not feel exciting, but it feels solid. Even suffering was interpreted differently. Suffering was not a sign that something was wrong with life. It was a sign that life was being lived. This interpretation mattered. When suffering is normalized, it loses its power to destabilize identity. Today, suffering often feels like failure because life is expected to be comfortable. Before entertainment, comfort was not the baseline. Endurance was. This shift in baseline explains why people did not feel deprived. Deprivation requires comparison to a standard. The standard then was survival. As long as survival continued, the system was working. Entertainment introduces a new standard, enjoyment. Once enjoyment becomes expected, its absence feels like loss. Before that expectation, loss did not register. Time itself felt different because of this. Time was not something to be spent well or wasted poorly. It was something to pass through responsibly. Responsibility toward time replaced anxiety about time. Responsibility is grounding. This responsibility shaped moral judgment. People were judged not by how interesting they were, but by how dependable they were. Dependability required focus, patience, and restraint. These qualities are incompatible with constant distraction. Distraction weakens dependability. This is why entertainment, if introduced suddenly into such a world, would have been seen as dangerous rather than beneficial. Anything that pulled attention away from obligation threatened continuity. Continuity was sacred. Another consequence of life without entertainment was emotional compression. Emotions were real but rarely elaborated. People did not narrate their feelings constantly. They felt them, acted accordingly, and moved on. This did not eliminate emotional pain, but it prevented emotional looping. Looping is a modern problem. Modern entertainment often reinforces emotional loops by replaying stimuli that match a mood. Without that reinforcement, moods pass naturally. This passing made emotional life quieter, not emptier. Quiet emotional life reduced internal noise. Reduced noise allowed focus. Focus allowed endurance. Endurance shaped culture. Cultural practices reinforced this mindset. Gatherings were tied to cycles, seasons, transitions, shared labor. They did not exist to break routine permanently. They marked it. Marking time is different from escaping it. Escape implies dissatisfaction. Marking implies acceptance. Because of this, even moments of collective joy did not create craving for repetition. They were appreciated as moments, not templates. People did not expect life to feel like a celebration. Expectation, again, is central. Without the expectation of constant pleasure, people did not experience its absence as a problem. Life did not feel lacking. It felt demanding. Demand creates engagement. Engagement prevents boredom. The absence of entertainment also preserved attention span in a way that feels foreign today. Attention was not fragmented by constant switching. Tasks lasted as long as they needed to. Minds followed. This produced deep familiarity with routine actions. Familiarity builds competence. Competence builds confidence. Confidence reduces anxiety. Anxious minds seek distraction. Calm minds tolerate stillness. This explains why stillness did not feel threatening. It felt normal. A still moment was simply a moment before the next demand. Demand was guaranteed. Guarantee removed uncertainty. Without entertainment, uncertainty came from external conditions, weather, resources, health, not from internal restlessness. Internal restlessness often arises when the mind expects stimulation that does not arrive. Expectation again. Children raised in this environment did not develop a fear of being bored. They developed tolerance for waiting. Waiting was part of life. They learned that wanting something immediately was unrealistic. This learning shaped adult patience. Patience reduced impulsivity. Impulsivity disrupts systems. Systems lasted because impulsivity was rare. Even creativity, often imagined as dependent on leisure, thrived within constraint. Creativity was not about novelty for its own sake. It was about small improvements, clever adaptations, and memory. Creativity worked within limits rather than escaping them. Limits focus creativity. Focused creativity is sustainable. Entertainment today often seeks to remove limits. Removing limits increases stimulation but reduces grounding. Grounding was abundant before entertainment. As daily life became easier over time, this grounding weakened. Tasks consumed less time. Survival required less attention. Gaps appeared. These gaps were not immediately filled with meaning. Meaning had been tied to necessity. When necessity diminished, meaning loosened. This is the critical transition. Entertainment did not appear in a vacuum. It appeared to manage the psychological consequences of reduced necessity. When people no longer needed to focus constantly on survival, their minds turned inward. Inward attention without structure produced restlessness. Restlessness demanded relief. Entertainment offered it. This reframes modern boredom entirely. Boredom is not a timeless human problem. It is a product of conditions where time exists without obligation and expectation exists without fulfillment. Before those conditions, boredom could not form. Life without distraction did not feel empty because emptiness requires space between demand and meaning. That space did not exist. Demand filled time. Meaning followed demand. Only when demand faded did meaning need replacement. Entertainment became that replacement. But replacement is not restoration. Entertainment can fill time, but it cannot recreate the psychological structure that once made time meaningful by default. This is why modern people can feel bored even while constantly stimulated. Stimulation does not equal engagement. Engagement requires responsibility, continuity, and consequence. Before entertainment, consequence was everywhere. Consequences anchored life. Understanding this does not mean we should reject entertainment. It means we should recognize what it replaced. It replaced effort, repetition, patience, and shared endurance. Those things were not pleasurable, but they were stabilizing. Stability gave time weight. Weight prevented boredom. Life without distraction did not feel empty because emptiness was not a concept people had the conditions to experience. They were too busy enduring life to wonder how to escape it. And because of that, time passed not as something to be filled, but as something to be lived. Before entertainment existed, people did not experience time as something that demanded constant occupation. Time was not empty, waiting to be filled with stimulation. It was already claimed by necessity, responsibility, and consequence. Days moved forward because they had to, not because they were made enjoyable. Entertainment did not replace joy. It replaced effort. It replaced repetition. It replaced the quiet weight of survival that once structured every hour. When survival consumed the day, boredom could not exist. There was no gap between expectation and reality. Life asked for attention, and attention was given. As daily life became easier, that structure weakened. Tasks shortened. Effort diminished. Time opened up. And when time opened without inherited meaning, the mind began to feel restless. Entertainment emerged to manage that restlessness, not as luxury, but as regulation. This is why boredom feels so modern. It is not a lack of stimulation. It is the presence of time without consequence. And entertainment, for all its variety, cannot fully replace what consequence once provided. Understanding what people did all day before entertainment existed reveals something uncomfortable. Distraction is not a solution to emptiness. It is a response to it. And emptiness is not natural. It is created when effort disappears faster than meaning can adapt. People once lived without needing to escape their days because their days demanded them. Time did not need to be filled. It needed to be endured, managed, and lived through. That world is gone. But understanding it helps explain why modern life, despite endless entertainment, often feels strangely hollow. Thank you for staying until the end. If this video made you rethink boredom, time, or attention, support the channel by liking the video, subscribing, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your curiosity keeps these deep historical explorations alive.